Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Kakashi Before Academy. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 6. Kindred. Training and more training. That was all he'd been doing these past 2 months. And while he did like growing stronger and learning new things, he was quickly becoming tired of the unending routine of getting up, running through the village in a half-awake daze, practicing this stupid tree walking or whatever it was called, doing those strange hand movements from the scroll over and over again incessantly. He needed a change in scenery. Which was why you could now see the small frame of a blond boy sneaking his way through the Uchiha compound. Those police force people or whatever they were called were always being mean to him, always sneering at him and carelessly bumping into him with all the care of an inebriated bovine farm animal. It was time for a little revenge. He'd hatched a brilliant prank. Uchihas were all about their stuck-up attitudes and their high and mighty shirts with those fans on them, so why not dye them pink? It was perfect. Not only would it stick it to those Uchihas that a 7-year-old had managed to sneak past them, but it would also make a joke out of their beloved crests. Hopefully that dreadful eye of theirs would burn the image of their defaced symbol into their mind for a long while. Yes, this was just what he needed. He missed that rush, that daring feeling of going into the unknown and becoming the mastermind behind an unsuspecting victim's bad day. Everything was going well. Almost too well. Okay, what the hell? Is security always this lax? Perhaps it was because of the fact that the clan estates were now on the outskirts of Konoha. Or maybe they believed that no one would ever dare to break into the esteemed manors. Regardless, this worked well for him, so he wasn't about to complain. He managed to tiptoe his way through the mini-market district of the compound, making his way on a random porch and ever so slowly sliding one of the paper doors open. Weren't Uchihas proficient with fire? Those flimsy walls were definitely a health hazard. Get back here, you pervert. He briefly considered following those orders and going back to mess with her. After all, there was nothing funnier than seeing people's gobsmacked expressions when he did that. But even he knew not to test the righteous fury of an angered woman. He'd managed to sneak inside the bedroom of an unsuspecting Uchiha and, after making sure that it was indeed empty, had started looking for one of those blue shirts that all the clan members seemed to wear. What he hadn't expected was to reach inside the first drawer and pulling out a pair of black undergarments which had Izumi etched in girly writing on the label. He'd been so surprised that he quickly shut the drawer closed once more, a bit too loudly. The door slammed open and lights were turned on, revealing the 7-year-old with a hand on the underwear drawer. One thing led to another, and he now had a 13-year-old brunette chasing after him, spouting out obscenities so rude they would make a sailor blush. "I wasn't looking at your underwear, promise," yelled the terrified blonde over his shoulder as he sprinted out of the compound, the girl still hot on his tail. Said girl merely growled angrily. "You think I'm gonna believe that, you little shit? I said come back here." Never. The chase went on for a few good minutes, though luckily for Naruto, he managed to lose her in the crisscrossing alleys a long way away from the Uchiha clan. Panting to catch his breath, he rested a hand right above his furiously beating heart. Man, women are scary. The sudden sound of footsteps made him spin around, thinking that that girl had found him once more, though he relaxed slightly when he saw it wasn't the Uchiha he was expecting. "Itachi," he said hesitantly, struggling to remember the name of the man that had taught him the body flicker. The prodigy was dressed in those clothes he would see Kakashi or Dog dressed in sometimes, though unlike him, he wasn't wearing a mask. Itachi seemed to have barely noticed him, being too lost in his thoughts to see the smaller boy. Itachi looked up slowly, startled out of his musings. "Oh, Naruto-kun," he greeted in that same soft tone that he remembered. Naruto smiled and ran up to him in excitement. Hey, thanks again for teaching me that body flicker," crowed Naruto. "Kakashi was really impressed thanks to you." Itachi offered him a weak smile. "I'm glad." The Uzumaki frowned in worry. The Uchiha seemed like he was carrying a lot of guilt, if the tense shoulders and slightly bowed head was of any indication. Maybe one of those Anbu missions he'd heard Kakashi talk about had gone wrong. "Naruto," began Itachi hesitantly. The blonde looked up at the taller man, head tilted to the side in acknowledgement. The dark-haired teen's eyes left the ground and locked onto the ones of the blonde. "Please, Look after Sasuke for me. Huh, was his confused reply. The teen's eyes began to bleed to red, and before he knew it, his whole world had gone dark. When he came to the next morning, an entire clan had been slaughtered by the hands of the pacifist prodigy. None had been spared. None save for Sasuke and Izumi Uchiha. 10 months later. He could feel him. Last time, he had taken him by surprise. But this time, he was ready. He had been training relentlessly for this moment. He quickly strapped his short blade to his back, one of his most recent purchases. The scroll had made him practice kenjutsu katas with a stick, and after a year of that, he thought he was finally ready to wield the real thing. He threw his window open and jumped out into the streets of Konoha. Left, right, he was moving far faster than he was last year, easily traveling through the streets in record time thanks to the help of chakra and quick bursts of the shunshin. One thing that made it difficult to use that move too much was the tunnel vision that usually came with it. But after spending a whole year and a half practicing, he was now so accustomed to it he could now barely feel a thing. He burst through the foliage, heedless of anything but the feel of his chakra. His gaze locked onto the lazy hunched figure of the Jonin reading his book. There he was. Placing his hand on the hilt of his tanto, he closed the distance in the blink of an eye with another use of the shunshin and freed his blade from its hilt. Kakashi didn't even look up as the short blade was effortlessly stopped by a kunai. Geez, he hadn't even seen him pull it out. Now, the Hokage chided lightly, eyes never leaving his book. No need to be so eager. Naruto's face, who had been contorted into one of great effort, shifted into strained amusement as he put all of his weight behind the sword in an attempt to make the taller man budge. TCH, should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The masked man hummed in agreement. Perhaps, but still a good effort. He disappeared from his line of sight, making the Jinchuriki nearly fall at the sudden lack of resistance. Behind you. The blonde whipped around and quickly launched himself back with the use of the body flicker. Skidding backwards into a stop, he brought his arm back and threw his tanto at Kakashi. The blade soared through the air and speared the head of the Jonin, who stumbled backwards in surprise and dropped to the floor, unmoving. Naruto froze as his eyes widened. What the heck? Had he killed him? How? He was supposed to be one of the strongest shinobi in this village. The unmoving figure suddenly disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Naruto released the breath he'd been holding in. His relief was short-lived though, as metal wires suddenly tightened around him, locking his arms to his sides and nearly slicing his skin. Don't get distracted, reprimanded the copycat, appearing out of thin air in front of him. Naruto glared at the wires in frustration before a mischievous grin pulled its way onto his lips. The Uzumaki disappeared as a wooden log took his place from within the stringy confines. Substitution, huh, thought Kakashi to himself. He was impressed. The boy was making great progress with his training. His strikes felt stronger and his movements faster and more fluid. The sound of footsteps on grass drew his attention as he blocked a tanto strike aimed at the back of his neck with a kunai, the longer blade coming dangerously close to his skin. And his stealth, at least all those pranks were good for something. He jumped away as a second tanto rushed at him, two blonde blurs now swinging the deadly blades around. He easily weaved in between their surprisingly coordinated strikes, ducking under an overhead slash and using his low center of gravity to sweep at the clone's feet. The doppelganger tripped, and was struck in the head with the butt of the kunai. Although he wouldn't admit it to the blonde in fear of stroking his ego, the Sharingan wielder admired the way Naruto learned new techniques. He would practice them relentlessly, every single day until he could do them instinctually with minimal effort. The three moves that he knew, the shadow clone, body flicker, the substitution, they were all trained to perfection, each manifested with no smoke and no hand seals. It really was impressive. Kakashi had met Jonins that hadn't had that level of mastery. The second clone quickly put his tanto away and rushed at Kakashi, jumping high to make up for the height difference and throwing a punch at the Jonin's face. Predictably, the punch was easily caught and Kakashi yanked the blonde towards him, delivering a powerful punch to its face. Being rid of the two clones, the masked man decided to switch to offense and flipped his reverse hold of the kunai to a normal hold. He was upon the blonde in seconds, the knife already in motion to be plunged into the boy's larynx. It took every ounce of Naruto's newfound reflexes and speed to raise his tanto for protection, both blades clashing in between them. The two stared into each other's eyes, one aloof with a slight edge behind it and the other blazing with fierce determination. Kakashi put more force behind his weapon, forcing the Tonto away and landing a painful front kick into the boy's sternum. Naruto grunted and was pushed back, though he managed to remain on his feet this time. He ducked under a kunai swing from Kakashi and did his best to deflect the following ones. Sparks flew as steel met steel repeatedly, the only thing standing between Naruto and painful cuts being his liberal use of shunshin. Time to end this, thought the copycat. He'd seen enough. Disappearing in a burst of speed, Kakashi reappeared behind Naruto far faster than the blonde could see, his hand coming down into a downwards chop. His hand never made contact with the soft squishy feel of skin however, instead being stopped by something hard and cold. His eyes opened wide in surprise as an ethereal golden chain stopped him from striking his neck. A feral grin appeared on the face of the Jinchuriki. This isn't over yet. The chain lashed out, pushing the Jonin back as Naruto sprang into action, his chain following behind him like a golden tail. He threw a right hook at the taller man which was avoided, then spun around quickly, the chain whipping around and striking Kakashi in the side. Kakashi turned into a wooden log as the vicious lynx gouged into the bark. Naruto quickly looked left and right in search of the silver-haired man, but froze when he felt cold steel against the back of his neck and a foot on his chakra chain pinning it into place. Yield, commanded Kakashi. Naruto didn't move for a few seconds out of pure stubbornness. After a while though, he sighed and raised his hands in surrender. Kakashi nodded and pulled the knife away, taking a step back as the blonde Jinchuriki collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion. All was quiet in the training ground, the sound of the blonde boy huffing loudly as he caught his breath being the only noise. Kakashi silently watched as the golden chain vanished into dust, frowning in thought at the phenomenon. There's no mistaking it. That's Kushina's ability. What happened to your mask? The Hotake blinked and looked up at the blonde. What was that? Naruto pointed at his hip. Your mask, you're usually always with it. Where did it go? True enough, Kakashi felt the clear uncomfortable absence of weight of the familiar carved face on his hip. Oh, that. He winced and glanced down, debating how to explain it. Dog is gone, for now. The blonde raised an eyebrow, but in the end decided to flop back down onto his back. He was too tired to care about some stupid mask. Dog sucked anyway. The Jonin slowly approached him and sat down next to him. So, those chains. I know, they're pretty cool, right? They surprised me too at first. Quite. Agreed Kakashi. How did you first, you know? A pause. Make them. The blonde gave him a small sheepish smile as he ran his fingers through the soft grass. Hehe. Funny story. A memory flashed through his brain, walking down the stairs, tripping, heading face first into the concrete floor, only to be saved by a chain wrapping around the railing next to the stairs. I was interrogating some enemy shinobi and I ran out of wires, so when I thought about what else I could use as bindings, these came out. Quote. I see. Kakashi said in a deadpan. He totally did not believe him, but he didn't press it. Naruto opened his mouth, but quickly shut it closed with a small click. After a few more silent moments, he leaned up onto his elbows to look at the older man. Hey, Kakashi, he asked hesitantly. Came the lazy reply. My mom, he began as he saw the man's eyes shift to look at him. She had that ability as well, didn't she? The Jonin watched Naruto carefully. He wouldn't lie to him. If the boy found out the truth on his own accord, then that was something that could not be helped. He owed him that much at least. Yes, she did. The blonde lied back down as he stared up the sky. And, she used those against the nine tails. He tilted his head towards the man once more. When he got sealed into me. Kakashi nodded once more. She did. Naruto sighed softly as he closed his eyes. That was something that he appreciated from the scarecrow. He told him the truth, and he didn't ask uncomfortable questions. He cared about the old man, he really did, but he was hiding too many things from him. He didn't think he could ever trust him like he trusted Kakashi. That thought made him pause. He trusted Kakashi because he was the only one that has been truthful to him. The only one that had given him the time of day with no ulterior motives. The only one who felt genuine. But why? Why are you doing all of this for me? He muttered suddenly. But Kakashi understood perfectly. Was this the right time? Naruto definitely was a lot more mature and responsible than other kids his age, but he was still just that, a kid. One prone to his emotions like any other kids his age. No more lies. I owe it to your parents. Naruto shot up into a sitting position, furious and slightly misty eyes glaring into his. Who the hell are my parents? You and the old man, you're always saying my parents this and my parents that, but you've never given me a straight answer. Kakashi heaved a sigh. Have you ever had a good look at the portraits inside the Hokage's office? Naruto frowned and wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeves. Portraits creep me out. What does this have to do with anything? That's all you'll get out of me. That is plenty for you to figure it out on your own. Replied Kakashi with finality, making the blonde frown and nod reluctantly. The scarecrow reached inside his pouch and pulled out a slip of paper. Take this. Naruto raised an eyebrow and looked at the piece of paper curiously. What is it? He asked as he took it in his hands. He flipped the paper over, checking each side. Yep. Just a regular piece of paper. Channel your chakra into it. Instructed the Jonin. Naruto frowned and did just that, molding the mystical energy from his core and guiding it through his pathways, down his arm and into the piece of paper. To his surprise, the paper got cleanly cut into two from the middle. Whoa, said the blonde wonder in slight awe. That's cool. What does it mean? Kakashi hummed and rubbed his chin in thought. Huh, that complicated things. Not many people were attuned to the wind element in Konoha, or in High no Kuni in general. Good job today, go rest up. With that, the masked scarecrow disappeared in a hurry. Huh, hey. Naruto scrambled to his feet and shouted out at the empty field. What do I do now? Do I just keep doing the same training? Silence met his question as he looked around in slight confusion. After seeing that the masked man really was gone, determination creeped onto his face as he set his gaze towards the direction of the Hokage's tower. 10 minutes later. Hokage-sama. He's in a meeting with the council right now, Naruto-kun. You can wait for him in his office if you want. The secretary said as she scribbled down on some paperwork. There was nothing to fear after all, everyone knew that Naruto and the Hokage had a really close relationship. Naruto nodded gratefully. Thanks, Eri. Once he was inside, he looked around the quiet room with slight apprehension. There were 4 portraits hung on the right side of the room, all with expensive-looking golden frames adorning them. Slowly making his way to the portraits, he looked at each of them carefully. The first one was a tall man with tan skin and long black hair with 2 strands framing a red bandana. He had a big smile on his face, suggesting a goofy and carefree attitude. He was wearing the same robes that Hiruzen Jiji wore all the time. A previous Hokage, perhaps. He looked towards the second one. The man was wearing the Hokage hat, but he could see shaggy silver hair poking out from beneath it. 3 red lines were drawn onto his face, one on each cheekbone and one going vertically on his chin. He was wearing a custom-looking headband, almost looking like a half-helmet that protected his forehead and the sides of his face. His eyes were a surprising shade of red and unlike the previous Hokage, he had a stern look and seemed to be staring right into his soul. The third one was easy to recognize. It was the old man, though he looked a little younger. That was super weird, there was a time where he didn't look like an old fossil. So, the 2 previous portraits were probably the first and second Hokage respectively. His eyes landed on the 4th and final portrait, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. Spiky blonde hair, bright blue eyes, a kind smile. This was no doubt the 4th Hokage, the man that had sealed the 9 tails inside of him. He'd never seen a close-up picture of him before, only having seen the carved face on the mountain. But it was a bit difficult to make out any defining features from there. Your father looks a lot like you, so much so that it's scary. Kakashi's voice rung out inside his head. No. He stumbled back, his entire body feeling numb from the shock. He leaned against the Hokage's desk as he tried to process the millions of thoughts raging through his mind, much too fast for him to keep up with. A smaller framed picture sitting on the desk caught his attention, one amongst many others that were there. A picture of that same blonde man hugging a woman with scarlet red hair. Red hair was a common trait amongst Uzumaki clan members. He remembered reading during his research of his heritage. No. But that damned Uzumaki, she held me down with her pesky chains before I could finish the deed. The voice of the 9-tailed growled. I've been passed down, from one container to another like some type of family heirloom. He felt something click in his head. It all suddenly made sense. His mother was the previous container. His mother had held down the 9 tails as his father sealed it into him. Both died afterwards, leaving him all alone. Kakashi had been trained by his father, that was why he was taking such an interest in him. The reason why the third never told him was because he knew how he would react to the news. Lies, 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 all lies. He felt his breathing pick up as his head began to swim. No, that couldn't be possible, could it? There was no way he could possibly be his son. Not with how he was being treated. What kind of father even sealed a giant beast of mass destruction inside of their own son? Lord Fourth was a pretty smart and analytic person. I believe he would pick the person best suited for the job. He did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He threw the door open with a bang and ran as fast as he could out of the office, leaving a worried hidden Anbu behind. He ran down the corridor, down the stairs, out the main entrance, down the streets of Konoha. His heart hammered in his chest as tears trailed down his face. He kept running, past Kinta's shop, past the academy, past his apartment, past the great gates of Konoha. He had to get away from here. He didn't know where he would go, but he couldn't be here right now. He couldn't face anyone. He ignored the calls of the 2 men in green vests guarding the entrance and kept running past the tree lines. Where the hell is he going? A man with long spiky hair and a bandage covering the bridge of his nose said in confusion. The man next to him, with the longer hair and bandana, frowned at the tree lines. I don't know, Katetsu. We should probably go inform the Hokage. No. Let him go. Both men turned around in surprise. Ah, Kakashi-san. I didn't see you there. Azumo frowned in worry. Are you sure he'll be alright? Kakashi looked off into the direction that his pseudo-student had ran to with a slight frown. He'll be fine. Both gate guards looked at each other in confusion. Sasuke-kun. Sasuke-kun. Do you want me to walk you home? Sasuke-kun, I can carry your bag for you. Sasuke-kun, you looked so cool during the spars today. Sasuke turned away and stuffed his hands inside of his pockets in disinterest as a group of annoying academy girls fought for his attention. He was used to it though. Ever since he started the academy exactly a year ago, it has been like that. He was the class idol, the boy who everybody wanted to befriend. The prodigy. One of the last remaining Uchiha. This last year had been something else. So much had happened and it felt like it had been dragging on for so long, yet 12 months ago seemed like it was just yesterday. He'd started the academy, hoping to do well there and impress his big brother. Yet, that same big brother went crazy and ended up murdering his entire clan, with the exception of him and Izumi. Speaking of Izumi, she had insisted that he move in with her. Her reasoning being that she didn't think he'd be able to take care of himself and that she wanted him away from the place he found his parents' corpse to avoid phantom memories. He didn't quite understand her reasoning though, the entire clan compound was tainted in his opinion. Despite that, he was really grateful for her. He was sure that he would have lost it, all by himself. Even though he'd never interacted with her before the genocide, the two became closer, almost becoming like brother and sister. He didn't know what drove Itachi to spare her as well, but he was glad. He arrived near the gated entrances and pushed one of the doors opened, the metal gates creaking and groaning in protest. He made his way further down the estate, walking past several residences and only pausing when his old home came into view. Is that you, Sasuke? He heard Izumi call out to him. The 8-year-old Uchiha sighed and made his way inside the house of the brunette, who was sorting through her ninja equipment in her shinobi attire. Going on a mission? He questioned as he tossed his bag on the table of the living room. Izumi looked towards him and smiled as she stood up. Yup. Got assigned today. How was the academy? She asked while attaching her pouch to her pants. Sasuke just shrugged and sat on one of the chairs in the living room. It was fine, he answered simply. The girl nodded, used to his short replies by now. As she stood to make her way out, the youngest of the two sat up straighter in his chair and called out to her. Izumi. She turned around and looked at the boy. I was thinking, he began uneasily. How come? Itachi didn't, you know. The girl winced as Sasuke fumbled uncomfortably with his words. Kill you. That question had puzzled Izumi as well. Itachi knew her, They spoke regularly. He would have noticed that she wasn't in the clan towards the time of the murder. Perhaps he hadn't had the time to look for her. Or maybe he didn't have the heart. The implications towards the second option scared her. I got lucky, she answered after a few seconds of silence. I wasn't in the clan at the time. Some blonde kid with whiskers broke into my house and was trying to dye my clothes as a prank, go figure. She smiled grimly and shrugged. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably be dead as well. He saved my life in a weird way. Sasuke remained quiet as Izumi waved at him and exited her house. He'd only seen one blonde kid with whiskers around the village. That same blonde kid that he'd met training. That same blonde kid that Itachi had asked him to befriend. That same blonde kid that seemed to be unanimously hated around the village. He was beginning to see a pattern. He'd been running for at least an hour northwest of Konoha by now, and the trees were becoming fewer and fewer. His fuzzy mind absently recalled the maps he remembered seeing and estimated being a few kilometers away from the borders of Yugakure, also known as the land of hot water. His mad sprint soon slowed into a rapid run, then to a jog and soon into a slow walk. His eyes never looked ahead of him though, staying locked onto the ground below him as half-lidded dejected eyes stared blankly at the dirt. It's not like anyone will miss me there. That's not true. What about old man Tuki and Ayame? What about the Hokage? And Kakashi? He screwed his eyes shut as he shook his head stubbornly and wiped at his eyes furiously. No. They didn't care. No one did. If they did, they would have told him the truth from the start. He was so lost in his thoughts and his self-wallowing that he barely even noticed the tall muscular man facing away from him with his arms crossed until he bumped into him. Ow! Naruto bounced back and landed on his behind. The man in front of him didn't even move an inch. Yo, that ain't cool, bro. Looking up, Naruto was greeted with the sight of the darkest and most muscular man he'd ever seen in his short life. He had white hair that was combed back and tucked into a white headband depicting the symbol of Kumogakure, the village hidden in the clouds. He had a goatee and wore shades that somehow stayed on even though they had no branches to hold them in place and carried 8 fricking swords on his back. He had the kanji for iron tattooed in blue on his left shoulder, as well as 2 parallel horns under his right eye. Other than that, he seemed to be wearing some stylized version of a cloud ninja uniform. Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. Naruto quickly got back up to his feet and wiped his eyes with a sniffle. The man looked down at him with an unreadable expression before a grin broke out onto his face. Don't sweat it, little man, I was just finishing my plan. What are ya doing on your own when evening has just begun? Naruto blinked slowly as his tired brain tried to process what the strange man had just said. I'm just taking a walk, I guess. He looked up at the headband tied around his head. What's a Kumo shinobi doing all the way in Fire Country? The man crossed his arms and bobbed his head to an invisible beat. Had some business to take care of in the land of iron, but I thought I'd take a detour down southern. That kid is a Jinchuriki. A booming voice said inside the Kumo nin's head. Ya ain't gotta tell me that, mighty Hachibi-sama. It's like I'm standing next to Yugito, only cranked up to 100, yo. That's probably because this boy holds the 9 tails. I've told you in the past that the power difference between each tail is increasingly more powerful, be careful with this one. Oh, alright, I'll see you, I guess. Naruto was about to walk off when the man put a hand on his shoulder. Hold on now, friendo, I know you're not leaving without telling me your name, don't be giving me no woes. Oh, I'm sorry. Naruto scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. A big grin appeared on the shade-wearing man's face once more as his head and arms made those weird motions once more. Ya seem to be cool little fishcake, so I'll tell you my name, make no mistake. You can call me Master Kurabi, 'cause I float like a butterfly and I sting like a killer bee, Naruto took a cautious step back as he slowly nodded his head. Better stay on that guy's good side. I see. Well, it was nice to meet you, Kurabi, but I better get. He was interrupted as the man was suddenly next to him, an arm thrown over his shoulder in an amicable way. Now little fox, ya don't need to gawk. But I can't let you leave when I see you so down, ya gotta tell me what made you frown, fool, ya fool. The blonde's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you wanna know that? His brain finally caught up with the rest on the man's sentence. Wait, fox. He threw Kurabi's arm away from his shoulder and jumped back a few meters away. How do you know about that? Kurabi ignored the smaller boy's suspicion as he began to make some rapping movements that matched his lyrics. Ya gotta keep it cool, otherwise that would just be cruel. I gotta make sure my fellow Jinchuriki is happy, or my name ain't the mighty killer bee, we. He finished his dance with a hand thrown in the air, all fingers curled in except for the index and pinky making a crude imitation of horns. The blonde's eyes widened as he took a step towards the man that could probably understand him better than anyone. You mean you're? That's right, sucker. Anything else would be a mother fu. B. He is a child. Watch your language. Hachibi yelled inside his head. B winced and massaged his now throbbing temple, making Naruto look at him in concern. Are you all right, Mr. Kurabi? B nodded carelessly and went on. Just the old partner in crime giving me a hard time. Naruto took another step forward in amazement. You can talk to him. Kurabi grinned widely, idly taking note on how Naruto addressed Hachibi as he, and not it, and nodded his head. You better believe it, bro. If ya don't, then I can prove it for show. Just bump yo fist against mine, and we'll be done in no time. Fool, ya fool. Naruto looked at the extended fist in confusion and stared at his own for a few seconds. After a moment's thought, he walked forward and extended his arm, touching his fist against Kurabi's. The strange sensation of vertigo assaulted his senses as he closed his eyes in an effort to contain his lunch. Once the feeling was gone, he slowly opened them to find himself standing in a white void with Kurabi in front of him, and a giant bull with the body of an octopus. What the hell was that? No need to fret, lil. Bro, Hachibi ain't gonna bite you, yo. The Eight-Tails lowered his head to be at better level with the little boy. B is right, I asked him to bring you in here to meet you. You said your name was Naruto, right? Naruto nodded quickly as sweat trickled down in face. Why yes. It's nice to meet you, Mr. I mean Hachibi. One of the Eight-Tails tentacles flicked idly behind him. You don't have to worry about that title. My name is Gyuki. Though that fool down here still calls me Hachibi for some reason. Said fool crossed his arms. Nah, Hachibi. I mean no disrespect. There's no way I would. B paused abruptly and took out a notepad from his pocket, flipping it open and putting one finger under his chin thoughtfully. Expect, direct, reflect. Anyway, the Ox hybrid began after a few seconds of silence. I wanted to speak to you about something. You were planning on leaving your village, right? Don't. You will be hunted down once they see that you're trying to leave. They will kill you and put Kurama inside another vessel. He doesn't need to be subjected to another sealing. The guy's been in enough of those already. Naruto looked up into the giant eyes of the octopus. Kurama. Gyuki frowned. That's the name of Mr. Doom and Gloom inside of you. At the look of panic appearing on the whiskered boy's face, he continued. I'm not surprised he didn't tell you. Naruto looked down glumly. I wanted him to tell me, when I finally gained his trust. That's no doubt an admirable trait, though it sure ain't no piece of cake. B is right. We Bijus are naturally wary of humans, the old fox even more so. Said Gyuki. He probably wouldn't tell you even if you were friends just to prove a point. That did nothing to lift Naruto's spirits. Yo, Mr. 9, why were you leaving the old tree anyhow? B asked suddenly, no doubt referring to Konoha. Because Naruto stopped suddenly. Because, he repeated, calmer this time. No one will miss me there. Plus, they've done nothing but lie to me ever since I was born. About my parents, about what happened to them, about Kura, Kyuubi inside my stomach. The blonde paced angrily as both ox and man watched him. I'm better off somewhere else. Kurabi pointed at the blue scarf wrapped around the blonde's neck. That scarf around your neck is looking mighty fine. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that looks like a gift, Mr. 9. What B is trying to say, Naruto, is that this scarf looks handmade, someone took the time to make it. But above all that, my point about the fox still stands. He doesn't need that grief. Naruto looked down at the floor. That seemed bottomless. They were right, it was a gift, and someone did care. He'd finally remembered why Kakashi seemed so familiar a while ago. He felt just like the Anbu that would guard his house the most and who probably left him this scarf. Even though he had his own strange way of showing it, Kakashi really did care and was the closest thing he had to family now. You're right, I've been acting selfish, I'm sorry. It ain't us you gotta apologize to ya witch, you one mighty sonafab. B was once again interrupted when a massive tentacle crashed against the back of his head, sending him to the ground. It's time to go home, Naruto. Naruto nodded slowly and soon, the area began to fade away. Once they were back in the real world, the two kept talking for a few minutes and Kurabi decided to accompany the blonde back to the borders of Konoha. Night was beginning to settle in, the time when ninjas truly lived up to their names. The trip was made mainly in silence, with B saying a few raps every now and then and Naruto looking down at the floor, deep in thought once more. An hour later, when they were barely a kilometer away from Konoha, the two came across a familiar-looking masked man leaning against a tree, arms folded and looking at the two. Kakashi. Naruto rushed towards the Jonin, who offered him an eye smile and a ruffle of his hair much to his consternation. The scarecrow looked up and met the shaded eyes of Kurabi. After a few seconds, he inclined his head slightly in a show of gratefulness. B returned the gesture after a few seconds. Naruto turned around as B approached them. Will I see you again, Kurabi? Kurabi grinned and extended his fist once more. Ya better believe it, little bro. Take care of yourself, yo. Naruto bumped his fist against B's with a wide grin and, after waving at him one final time, quickly ran to catch up with Kakashi. The two began their trek back in silence, Naruto not knowing what to say and Kakashi not wanting to say anything. Hesitantly, Naruto's hand came up and held onto the older man's hand. He said softly, his voice catching in his throat. I'm sorry. Kakashi kept on walking, being too surprised by the small show of trust. After a while though, he tightened his hold around his little brother's hand. Don't worry about it. Chapter 7. Promise. You know my name, you know my fame, don't be lame. 8 Tails. That's me, Darapan, Killer B. Heads turned as the eccentric Jinchuriki walked through the gates of his village. Many smiled and laughed, realizing that it was only the lovable Enka performer and went back to their conversations. Merchants that had just arrived in the village stared in bewilderment at the seemingly everyday occurrence. A tailed beast resides inside my hide makin' beats and rhymes and I'm makin' 'em live. It's what a Jinchuriki needs to survive, battle and battle up here in the beehive. A busty 19-year-old blonde girl stared at her teacher with a slight frown of worry, nervous sweat trickling down the side of her head. Win after win is the way that it's done. When I'm finished you'll wish we never met, son. Ah yeah. Drop kick. Everyone looked up as a figure descended from the sky and crashed into the unsuspecting host of the 8 Tails, creating a large cloud of dust. When it finally cleared up, everyone could see their Raikage with his foot firmly planted on his brother's face, who was now pinned down on the ground. You haven't learned a thing, have you? Yelled the Raikage in fury. B groaned as he attempted to pull his brother's foot off of his face. What's up, brother? You surprised me too much. I moved his foot away from B's face and grabbed onto his collar, lifting him up and shaking his limp body around. I let you go out on a mission for the first time in years, and what's the first thing that you do? You leave your team all alone and go your own way. You fool. B raised both his arms and extended his index and thumb to make his hands look like guns. The universe works in mysterious ways, bro. Who knows what it's got in store, yo. A vein throbbed on the Raikage's forehead. My patience is running thin, B. Do you want me to introduce you to my Iron Claw again? No, brother. That Iron Claw is too much of a killer. Will you please stop that annoying rapping? You suck, muttered Gyuki in annoyance. B dropped his head in defeat. No one could appreciate good Enka around here. The Jinchuriki looked towards his brother and, after taking note of the increasing anger on his face and the veins bulging on his head and neck, decided to quickly continue. It ain't like that, bro. I heard some intel at the inn we were at, so I followed in tow. Some S-rank business my green around the gill's teammates shouldn't witness, ya fool. The Raikage resisted the urge to use his fabled lariat on his own brother in favor of processing the new information. S-rank, you say? What made it your business for you to follow them, you reckless moron? The dark-skinned Enka enthusiast held up his hands defensively. Ah, brother, don't make me suffer. This feeling inside my gut was telling me they wouldn't make the cut. I had to go alone and be a good Samaritan. It's my duty as the mighty Killer B, we GAHK. B was interrupted as I dug his fingers around the top of his face. You're getting on my last nerves, B. No. Samui, help me. The blonde girl that was watching the two from a safe distance looked on helplessly. The third idly watched excited youths playing catch near the base of his tower, indulging in one of his pastimes and puffing on his trusty wooden pipe. He liked that pipe. It was sturdy, made of mahogany and had some lovely carvings on it. A thoughtful gift from his son dearest. Kakashi stood behind him with his ever-present lazy slouch and aloof half-lidded eyes. He quietly observed the smoke rolling in the air, making random shapes wherever the draft took it. So, he knows. Hiruzen rumbled quietly, his voice coarse like gravel. The Anbu hidden in the room 2 days ago had seen Naruto come into the office and look at the paintings a bit too intently. It wasn't difficult to link it to his sudden escape attempt. The scarecrow hummed in agreement as Hiruzen looked upon the faces of his predecessors. What of his state of mind? He's fine, drawled out Kakashi. Though he probably won't be calling you, old man, for a while. Hiruzen ripped his eyes away from the mountains and turned around, facing Kakashi as he took a drag from his pipe. The crafty Kage stared at the Jonin for a moment before finally speaking again. How little you must think of me, Kakashi. Kakashi straightened ever so slightly. Nearly unnoticeable to the untrained eye but easily distinguishable to Sarutobi. I care for Naruto. I really do. I wish only the best for him. He sighed tiredly and slowly sat down on his chair. But I am the Hokage first and foremost. My task is to keep this village safe, and I have done so for 40 long years through wars and attacks. And Naruto, well, he is an important asset to this village. Him knowing the truth about his tenant and his heritage could have made him be at risk to escape the village, as you have clearly seen already. Kakashi disagreed. He would have been fine had someone been able to adopt him from the start. All he needed were kind words, support, encouragement. People that loved him. A frown made its way on his face. You made him this way. A Jinchuriki is too much military power for one non-blood related family to look after. We've been over this. Had someone adopted him, like you said, there would have been jealousy among the clan heads. Everyone wants to be able to get their hands upon such an abundant source of power. The Hitaki wanted to argue. A civilian family would have worked as well. But he knew what Hiruzen's view on that was. He thought that a civilian family would deter Naruto from pursuing a ninja career, and Konoha needed a powerful Jinchuriki to protect it. Giving him to a ninja family would have been too great of a shift in balance. So, the Hokage had planned to leave him at the orphanage until he was old enough to take care of himself. Unfortunately, that hadn't really gone as planned. Sarutobi heaved a small sigh as he picked up the paperwork on his desk and placed it in front of him, his eyes skimming over their content. How is his training coming along? If I recall, I allowed him to forego the academy in favor of having him focus on the training that you are giving him. It's going fine, said Kakashi, gaze moving to the window and setting on the evening sun. He should be done with it in about 10 months. Hiruzen paused abruptly in his writing and looked up at the copy nin. Setting his pen down, he steepled his fingers together and leaned back slowly in his chair. You're planning to have him take the genin test near the end of the year. It wasn't a question but a statement. Hiruzen was smart, it wasn't hard for him to make the connection. Kakashi shrugged in affirmation, making the old Sarutobi frown slightly in doubt. Do you really think that he is ready? Right now, I'd put him at high genin level, supplied the Cyclops. By the end of the year, he should be ready to take on most low to mid shunins. He nodded slightly to himself at his pupil's assessment. Besides, it's not that uncommon. I became genin at 5 and Itachi became 1 at 7. We were at a time of war back then. Kakashi and Itachi was a prodigy like none I've seen before. Those were different circumstances. Hiruzen grumbled quietly to himself and closed his eyes. Nevertheless, if you deem him ready, then I shall trust your judgment. I truly hope that you know what you're doing. Naruto has no friends of his own age, the only people he interacts with are you, me and the ramen chef. Not putting him in the academy to make friends puts him at risk to run away. He's tried it once. He will probably try it again. Kakashi frowned, but inclined his head in acceptance. 1 extra large miso for the young man. Chuki exclaimed jovially and placed the giant bowl of ramen in front of the drooling blonde. Naruto quickly wiped his mouth with his sleeve and eagerly broke his chopsticks apart. Thank you for the food. The ramen chef chuckled as he began to wash the dishes at the back. Meanwhile, Ayame smiled at the blonde as she leaned over the counter and watched him devour his food. So, Whiskers, you been keeping up with your training? Naruto nodded vigorously. Ishji woing JJ well. Ayame reached over and bonked the top of his head with a ladle, making him yelp in pain. Naruto, don't talk with your mouth full. He quickly swallowed his food and rubbed the sore spot on his forehead. Then don't ask me questions when I'm eating. Tsuki smiled fondly at the two bickering kids. He was glad Naruto came by quite often. It was nice for Ayame to be around someone close to her age. Hearing a sudden scream, he dropped the pot that he was carrying. Ayame, he called out. Dad. The urgency in her voice made him grab the nearest kitchen knife and rush to the front. Though he stopped in his tracks at the scene being played out in front of him. A man with gray hair and a mask, carrying his favorite customer over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. And he was knocked out. And the masked man was rubbing a red spot on his forehead sheepishly. And Ayame was holding her ladle threateningly. The ramen chef sighed. Kakashi. He greeted as he tossed the knife onto the counter. Kakashi turned towards him and inclined his head in a greeting. Tsuki, it's nice to see you. Whoa, wait, you know this guy, Dad? He just knocked out Naruto. It's fine, Ayame, reassured the older man. Kakashi is a friend. He turned back towards the Jonin. Though knocking him unconscious might have been a bit much, don't you think? He reprimanded. Kakashi shrugged. Had to be done. He turned around and sent a lazy wave over his shoulder. Later. Ayame blinked as the weird man suddenly disappeared from her line of sight. Where is he taking him? Tsuki just sighed. The hard impact of his back meeting the ground woke him up from unconsciousness. Opening his eyes, he winced as the sun blinded him momentarily. Where the hell am I? Wakey, came a voice he recognized as Kakashi. Quickly scrambling to his feet, the 8-year-old glared up at the masked man. What the hell was that for, asshole? I was enjoying my ramen. Kakashi gave him an eye smile. This year's training starts now. He turned around and gestured to the area around him. This here is Training Ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death, home to many giant and ferocious creatures, carnivorous plants and man-eating super-sized insects. Even Chunins would think twice before venturing in here. Naruto gulped nervously as the distant roar of something could be heard, almost as if to emphasize his point. And you want me to? Kakashi's smile seemed to grow bigger. Why survive, of course. I'll come get you once I think you've been in there long enough. Oh, and don't leave the forest, or I'll make you start over from zero. Good luck. The Jonin gave him a 2-fingered salute and disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving a stupefied blonde behind. What the fuck? In reality, Kakashi was still close by. He wanted to see what the blonde would be doing first. He'd been debating this for a while, putting him in the forest. It was dangerous and incredibly unethical, but the boy had surprising survival skills and instincts. Living 3 months on the streets had done wonders. He wanted to see just what 6 months in a deadly forest would do. This place had plenty of animals and plants that he could eat, and he knew that he was ready to defend himself if need be. He was going to be fine. God, I hate this place. I hate this place. I hate this place. Naruto lamented to himself. Only 10 minutes in this forest and he'd already been attacked twice. By rabid rabbits of all things. Since when did he have to be wary of rabbits? When I see that damn Kakashi again, I am so gonna make him pay. He placed a hand on the hilt of his tanto for comfort. At least he still had that. Though his pouch and scarf had been removed from him. He'd have to make do. He lifted up the dead rabbit by the ears and looked at its limp bloody corpse in slight guilt. He hadn't had the chance to eat that much at Ichiraku's and he was quickly getting hungry. Sorry buddy, but it's either you or me. And he definitely wasn't planning on dying in this forest. 3 weeks later. Birds flew away in fright as a giant white tiger, nearly the size of an elephant, took down another tree with its powerful front legs, once more missing the tasty-looking snack that was unnaturally fast and agile. The behemoth swiped at the pesky meat bag, growling in annoyance as it jumped above his paw, making him miss once more. Throwing its massive head back, it let out an earth-shaking roar that made the blond boy lose his footing on the tree branches and drop down onto the floor. Goddammit. Naruto dove to the side as a huge set of teeth came down with surprising speed. Cursing to himself, the blonde took out his tanto, flipped it into a reverse grip and flashed forward using the shunshin. With a slight yell, he thrust the blade ahead, pushing onto the butt of his sword with his other hand for extra strength and buried it into the beast's left eye socket. The tiger roared in pain and sent a vicious paw swipe at the blonde, the giant appendage crashing into his side and sending him violently through the forestry. Coughing, he shakily stood back up and glared at the giant feline. He winced lightly and pressed his hand against his side, making him hiss in pain. Just great, one of his ribs were either fractured or broken. He couldn't tell which, but he couldn't bring himself to care which one it was either. It hurt like a bitch regardless. Just what the hell was he supposed to do against that? And what was Kakashi thinking dumping him in a place like this? The white feline regained its bearings and set its angry slitted blue eye back onto the blonde. One eye was now closed, though the fury in the other one was clearly evident. It growled and slowly stalked forward. Naruto watched it getting closer and closer as hopelessness settled in his stomach. There was nothing he could do against that thing. He tried using his chains when he first encountered it, but it easily snapped them off like wet paper. His sword had disappeared somewhere in the bushes when the beast had lashed out, and a part of his mind was telling him that he wouldn't achieve much with hand to hand. After everything, this was how it ended. During his training. How pathetic. Naruto's eyes snapped open in surprise. He knew that voice. Only one person had such a deep tone. Kyuubi. The blonde muttered to himself in surprise. He heard a faint growl inside his mind once more. Are you really going to let such a harmless kitten snuff you out so early? Naruto said nothing in return. He'd already accepted his fate. There really was nothing he could do to fight it, and it probably could easily smell him if he tried to hide. HMPH. I was wrong about you. And with that, he felt Kyuubi's presence retreat inside his mind. Wrong about him. Did the Nine Tails actually think him to be more capable than he let on? That was surprising. But, now his opinion of him must have gone down considerably. No, he couldn't let that happen. He would prove him wrong. He would prove Kakashi wrong. He'd prove the Hokage and those narrow-minded villagers wrong. He'd show everyone. Rage swelled up deep within his stomach, bubbling, festering, like a dark and sinister presence fighting for control. He felt that hot painful feeling he recognized from the first time he tried to unlock his chakra. And against his better judgment, he pulled on it once more. And to his surprise, it didn't resist. Red chakra exploded around him as his pupils turned into narrow slits and his eyes bled to red. He snarled as the whiskers on his cheeks thickened and his hair stood on end. He felt stronger, so much stronger, and could feel his ribs snapping back into place. But this energy, it felt so evil, he could almost feel himself slipping away. The giant tiger, seeing its prey's aura increase tenfolds, shot forward with a loud roar of challenge. And with a roar of his own, Naruto ran towards the unstoppable behemoth. Two red chains burst from the ground next to him, each nearly as thick as his midsection. The chains flew forward and wrapped around its two front legs, making it stumble and stop in its tracks. It attempted to struggle against them, but they were much, much stronger than last time. Looking up in fright, it saw the blonde turned red suddenly in front of its face with his fist cocked back. With a vicious look in his twisted eyes, Naruto threw his fist forward with all his might, the resulting punch creating a small shockwave as the tiger was blown backwards several meters away. It rolled and tumbled and toppled a tree in its path, making it slow to a stop, unmoving. Naruto landed on the ground, face still contorted in fury. He growled and walked forwards. A chain through the brain would be more than enough to end it. Though when he got to the down animal, something inside its glacial eye made him stop suddenly. Its eye was wide open, pupil dilated as it stared at him with a weird mixture of sentient fear and grim acceptance. It knew it was going to die. This time, it had bitten off more than it could chew. And now, there was nothing it could do but accept its fate against the more powerful enemy. Human and animal stared at each other for the duration of several heartbeats. The red aura around Naruto began to shrink, more and more until it had finally faded away, whisker marks and eyes returning to their original look. The tiger lifted its head ever so slightly and inclined it in submission. The blonde stared at the wild animal, all traces of evil leaving his mind as if it were never there in the first place. Raising his hand, he brought it up and rested his palm softly against the beast's forehead. You are too soft, growled out the Nine Tails from within. A small smile appeared on the whiskered boy's face as he stroked the tiger's massive head. That was fine by him. Something attached to its hind leg caught his attention. He couldn't quite make out what it was from here, but it looked white, almost like a scroll. Pulling his hand away from its head, he circled around the tiger's massive body and approached the object. It was a scroll, held in place by ninja wire wrapped around the base of its leg. And on it was the kanji for wind. A few ways above. Seems like I don't need to intervene after all, was the thought of a certain smut enthusiast. He was currently standing near the top of the canopy, a few meters away from where the fight had taken place, and was masking his scent and presence to avoid detection from either of the combatants. He'd been worried that this tiger would have been too much for Naruto to handle, and he was fully prepared to step in when it had delivered a devastating blow to the blonde. However, imagine his surprise when his semi-pupil drew upon the power of his tenant to defeat the creature. Predictably, the power of the nine tails was something to be admired. Drawing upon merely a fraction of its power, the boy had managed to completely overpower the much larger animal. The inhabitants of this place were much bigger and stronger than regular ones due to the very nature of the forest. These woodlands had been created by none other than the first Hokage himself with the use of his wood style, and the creatures that took residence here have been within direct contact with the Shodime's potent chakra ever since. What surprised him even more though was when the enraged blonde had beaten the tiger with a single punch, mind you. Instead of killing it, he decided to tame it, the menacing aura of the Kyuubi retreating back into the seal. He didn't know why the blonde decided to do that, but it was definitely a smart move. This tiger was at the top of the food chain around here and would definitely be a powerful ally. How interesting. He wondered if he'd be able to find the rest of the scrolls he had hidden away. 1 month later. Drip, drip, drip. Naruto slowly opened his eyes and looked at the leaky pipe in surprise. He was back in his seal. He didn't remember coming here. Last thing he remembered was finding refuge in a quiet area of the forest as Kori, the white tiger he named after the word ice, went back to its den. He'd quickly fallen asleep, lulled by the sounds of the forest. And now, here he was. Feeling the familiar overbearing presence of the nine tails, Naruto turned around and came face to face with his tenant, who was sitting upright in his cage for once, glaring down at him with barely concealed fury. Hi Kyuubi. Naruto tried greeting with a small smile as he took a few steps towards the cage. The beast did not answer as its ruby eyes followed the boy. He shuffled awkwardly at the lack of response before he remembered something that made him look up with a smile. By the way, thanks for your help that time, against the tiger. It really saved my butt, haha. The fox continued to stare at the boy, frown still in place. A worried look crossed Naruto's features when he stayed silent. Is something wrong? Kyuubi snarled as his glare seemed to increase. A bead of sweat appeared on the blonde's forehead as pressure slowly began to build up within the sewers. He told you. The fox growled in disdain. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Huh, who told what? That pitiful ox, he told you my name. Do not play dumb with me, I saw it. Naruto's shoulders dropped slightly at the memory. Oh, that, yeah. He did. The blonde's confirmation only seemed to anger the fox even more as his fur stood on end and his eyes widened in fury. I should have strangled that pathetic octopus with his own tentacle when I had the chance. How dare he reveal it to an unworthy human? Naruto looked down as the growls of the beast with 9 tails continued to ring out throughout the seal. Would you really do that? Kyuubi looked down at the blonde as he looked up to meet his eyes. Would you kill your own sibling? The greatest Biju glared down at him once more and crouched back down into a lying position, head still elevated. Do not speak as if you knew me, human. And your irritating attempts to gain my trust are getting bothersome. What is it that you're truly after? I told you. Naruto frowned. I want to help the Bijus. I wanna set you free. A cruel smirk appeared on the fox's face. If you want to help me so bad, then remove the seal. A way that doesn't kill the Jinchurikis would probably be better. Replied the Uzumaki blandly. And why should I believe you? Kyuubi countered. You humans are all the same, only after things that will benefit you as well, always turning everything into another way to kill others. From the very start, you have used us. Not only that, but you have turned the teachings of the sage from an instrument of peace to a weapon of war. His tone was low and held an edge to it, far different to the usual loud and growly type. You have warped ninju into what you now call ninjutsu. A gift that was given to help you wretched humans understand each other was used in yet another way to create more bloodshed. Kyuubi scoffed in derision. You humans like to call us bijus evil, yet when given the power, you are no better. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed in sadness. Not all humans are like that, he retorted feebly. Some are good, some want to help. The fox snorted. Then what about the sage? He was a human too, wasn't he? Insisted the blonde. The massive beast closed his eyes and rested his chin upon his paws. The sage was the furthest thing to a human. He was a god in all but the name. He had control over life and death and commanded nature itself. He shaped the moon and created the 9 bijus on his deathbed. Even as I am now, I could easily wipe out your village like it was nothing. He was infinitely more powerful than any of you can imagine. Damn. That was definitely impressive. If what the fox said was true, this sage created the ninja world and made the moon. He made these gigantic beasts and could revive dead people. He couldn't even comprehend what kind of power was needed to do things like that. But that wasn't what caught his attention the most. As you are now? Questioned the blonde, making the fox snap his eyes towards him. What do you mean by that? Damn, the human had made him talk too much once again and now he'd revealed more than necessary. It means nothing. Now leave. Naruto felt that feeling he knew all too well, like an invisible force trying to push him out of his mind. The fox was trying to kick him out again, like he'd done so many times before. No. This was his mind, damn it. The blonde gritted his teeth as sweat began to form on his forehead from the effort of resisting the fox's attempt of kicking him out. He didn't know what exactly he was fighting against, but it was kinda working, he was still there. He balled his hands into fists and shut his eyes tightly as 2 chains erupted from his back and dug into the ground in an effort to keep himself anchored. Rog. With one more push, an invisible force countered the one that the 9 tails had made, making the fox frown in annoyance. The only power that he had from within the seal was to impose his will upon his container to force him to leave the mindscape. But this place was his warden's mind, if he tried hard enough, he could counter it. So you wield those infuriating chains as well after all, snarled Kyuubi in irritation. Naruto, for his part, was busy getting reacquainted with a thing called oxygen. Pant, this is my mind. You can't just kick me out whenever you feel like it. Gasped out the whiskered boy. The 9 tails huffed and closed his eyes, choosing to ignore the blonde instead. Let me help you, begged Naruto as he walked closer to the cage and placed his hands against the cold metal bars. Something happened to you, right? You can tell me. I want to help you. Kyuubi said nothing in return, making Naruto's shoulders droop in disappointment. Please, let me help you. After a few more seconds of the fox not saying anything, Naruto looked down dejectedly and turned around, slowly making his way back to the middle of the room. Just as he was about to leave, however, he heard the great beast speak up. I was split in half when I was sealed, said Kyuubi reluctantly. When that Yondaime sealed me into you, he took my yin counterpart. He was stuck here anyway. If there was even the slightest possibility that this human was being truthful, then he didn't really have anything to lose by telling him. Naruto turned around and stared at the fox. Your yin counterpart? He questioned, making Kyuubi tch. The blonde stared at him, awaiting further information, making him sigh tiredly. All living things are comprised of yin and yang. Yin is mental and spiritual, while yang is the physical aspect of our biological form. He informed. To put it simply, yin is your energy while yang is your body. Chakra itself is made by mixing yin and yang. It takes form when you combine your spiritual energy with your physical energy. Naruto blinked at the explanation as he tried to understand everything that was being said. So, you're saying that you only have your physical form right now, and your energy was taken from you, right? Kyuubi huffed at the crude explanation. A very dumbed down explanation, but yes, I suppose it will do. Naruto smiled widely in determination and pointed a finger at him. I'm gonna get you your half back. And when I have, I'm gonna find all the biju and free them, and keep all the Jinchurikis alive while doing so. I promise it, declared the blonde in conviction. Good luck with that, said the 9 tails sarcastically. My yin half is sealed inside of the Yondaime, who now dwells within the Shinigami's stomach. Naruto blanched at that. Oh man, the Reaper. The god of death himself. That made things a lot harder. He would have to find a way to talk to it, and hopefully convince it to release the fourth. And if he agrees, he will have to convince his father to release the yin half and return it to him. Easy, right? That won't stop me. Once I make a promise, I don't go back on it. That's my way of the ninja. The fox narrowed his eyes at the boy. How foolish. But I suppose that right now, you are my only hope, as much as I loathe to admit it. Naruto smirked at the fox. A promise had been made, and now, he had a reason to keep fighting. 4 months later, dark blue sandals landed on the forest floor of Training Ground 44. Sighing softly, Kakashi stretched his neck, making a few satisfying pops ring out in the deathly silent woodlands. He wasn't worried, however. Nothing in this place could hurt him. He hummed as he looked around the forestry. He wasn't exactly hiding his presence, and he was near enough his student that he knew it would only be a matter of time before he would notice him in the area and come find him, so he opted to instead lean against a tree and pull out his favorite book in the hopes of getting some reading done. Or at least, that was the plan. Until he felt something tugging at his feet. Looking down, he saw a small black fox of all things gnawing on his pants leg, making a few angry yipping sounds at the same time. What do we have here? Mused Kakashi to himself as he crouched down to get a better view of the frisky creature. It looked up at him with its cute little amber eyes and growled, white-tipped tail flicking behind him angrily. Just as he was about to reach out to pet it, a Tonto came flying through the bushes, its intended target being the Jonin's head. The copy nin easily leaned back, his eye never changing from its half-lidded bored look even as the blade buried itself on the trunk of the tree he was previously leaning against. Looking into the direction the blade had come from, he saw the small form of the 8.5-year-old boy that he'd taken under his wing those past few years. He looked different. Well, that wasn't exactly correct. He looked exactly the same save for him being a bit taller, his hair a bit longer and that small scar he could see behind his ear close to his neck. It was his aura that felt different. It was subtle, but it was there. More refined, cautious, in control. So you finally decided to show up, remarked Naruto ironically. It had been 6 whole months since he dumped him in this place after all. He bent down when the black fox rushed over towards him and yipped at him in excitement. Smiling, he reached out and opened his hand to reveal a few red berries, which the small animal wasted no time to devour in seconds. Kakashi watched the interaction in silence for a few moments, letting his student do his thing with the animals that he'd befriended in this place over the months. Are you ready to go back now? He finally called out after waiting long enough. MMH. Naruto confirmed as he waved at the fox, who yipped happily and disappeared into the bushes. Standing up, he raised himself to his full height and walked off into the direction of the gates without a word. They made the trip back in silence. Got any coffee? Naruto sent his teacher an irritated glare as he dried his wet hair with a towel. I don't know, I haven't been here in 6 months. He probably did, the Hokage had brought some over a while ago, but he wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of telling him. Ma, no need to snap. Making his way to the kitchen, the Sharingan wielder opened one of the cupboards and rummaged around in it in search of the heavenly black powder. The whiskered boy sighed and threw the towel on a chair. A warm shower had felt nice, and his clothes were in dire need of some complete washing. For 6 months, the only way he'd been able to clean himself and his clothes were from bathing in the little river near the center of the forest. Found it, you can stop looking. Called out Kakashi from the kitchen. Naruto rolled his eyes as he gave his plants some much-needed water. He was sure that they would have been dead by now, but it seemed like someone had stopped by every now and then to make sure they didn't dry out. He was grateful for that. Walking back to his kitchen, he saw Kakashi finishing up his coffee as he turned the dial of the gas plates to the off setting. Pouring it into a cup, he put a few spoonfuls of sugar, unscrewed the lid of the milk carton and tipped it upside down to pour it into the mug. But nothing came out. The carton definitely felt full though. He ignored the blonde's deadpan stare as he sheepishly thought to himself. Right, civilian. No stasis seals. That was fine, he didn't mind having it black. So, began Kakashi as Naruto sat in front of him on the dining table. How was it? A glare was his response. You dumped me in a forest. Yeah, replied Kakashi. Full of giant animals. Fuck you. Kakashi feigned shock and dramatically pressed the back of his hand to his forehead. Such language, did the animals teach you that? PFF'd. The whiskered boy scoffed and decided to ignore him for now. Kakashi began to sip on his coffee, somehow managing to keep his mask on in the process. Leaning back, he sighed contentedly as the drink warmed his body. There's something I haven't asked you yet. I wanted to give you time to come to terms with it. Naruto turned back to look at him. Ask me what? Your parents, he said bluntly, making Naruto flinch. How do you feel about the whole thing? The boy looked down, tracing his finger along the wooden shapes of his dinner table. I'm not sure. I'm glad I know the truth now, but, he paused. Now there's just a whole bunch of other questions that come up. Kakashi nodded in understanding. And, he trailed off. The masked man waited a few seconds for his student to continue. And, he prodded when he said nothing else. Naruto looked up furtively at him but bashfully reset his focus on the table. Well, it sounds selfish, but, it would have been nice to have something from them, you know. He said dejectedly. He'd been thinking about that for a while. It's stupid, he muttered as he watched the steam rolling from the hot coffee. Kakashi's eye curved up in amusement. Ah, but they did. The blonde's eyes snapped up to him. What? He asked in apprehension. They did leave things for you, repeated Kakashi. That scarf. The Jinchuriki reflexively placed a hand on his blue scarf at the mention of it. He didn't have it with him in the forest, so when he'd gotten home, he'd immediately put it back on. It was the second thing he'd done. It made him feel safe. Your mother made it for you. A knot formed in his throat as he lifted up an end of the scarf. She did. Sure did, he said jovially. And that toy you love so much? Naruto blushed slightly at the mention of it. It was embarrassing, but it was the first thing he'd gone to see upon arriving home. Your father bought it for you before you were even born. He was sure that you would have had loads of fun with that little drum. The knot in his throat seemed to manifest in his belly as well, and moisture began to gather in the corner of his eyes. He couldn't believe it. This whole time, his two most prized possessions had come from his parents. Kakashi had told him that they were excited to have him, but there was always that little doubt in his mind. But now he was sure. They did love him. Kakashi smiled slightly as he stood up from his chair, coffee in hand. Guess I'll take this one to go. He thought to himself. He should let the kid have the rest of the week off, he deserved it. Making his way to the door, he opened it and stepped out, leaving the shaking blonde with his thoughts. Everything is in order? Questioned a calm and commanding voice. Ringed Purple's eyes flickered to his subordinate, a man half black and half white with a Venus fly trap surrounding his head. Yes, Leader Sama. All traces of his trip from the leaf to here has been erased. While the black half had a deep and raspy voice, the white part had a more jovial and normal tone. The ring is also ready, he said as he handed a red ring to his leader. The leader nodded and fixed his gaze onto the Uchiha prodigy. Now, Itachi, you know what you must do. Itachi nodded as he was handed the ring and slipped it onto his right ring finger. It was kind of tight, but he could manage. Pulling his leaf headband out of his new Akatsuki cloak, he stared at it for a few moments, almost with a longing look before he placed it on the tree post in front of him and dragged a kunai across Konoha's motif. Looking at his work, he picked up the headband and tied it back onto his head. Then it's settled. Itachi Uchiha, you are now a member of the Akatsuki. Welcome, he said in the same monotonous tone he had become accustomed to. My name is Pain, but you will refer to me as Leader Sama. You shall wear the red ring, crimson, and take on the missions you will be assigned to. Kneeling in front of his new leader, Itachi nodded. Yes, Leader Sama. Good, said Pain as he turned around and walked off. Juzo Biwa will be your partner. I trust you two will work well together. Itachi turned around and laid his eyes on Juzo, who inclined his head in greeting. All around him, the other members of the Akatsuki who were overseeing the arrival of the new recruit dispersed in their own direction. Juzo was a tall, slender shinobi about the same height as the sword he wielded. He had no eyebrows, creases under his eyes, and a cross-shaped scar on his right cheek. His hair and eyes were dark gray in color, and his hair was short and spiky. He had light tan skin and had red grid-shaped paint covering his jaw. He didn't seem too bad, Looking laid back enough to not be totally psychotic like most S ranks had a tendency to be, so he supposed he got lucky this time. But damn, he missed Konoha. He missed his little brother. It was nice to be on the streets of Konoha again. The constant green of the forest was cool and all, but after a while it just became repetitive. He'd missed Konoha's architecture and the carved faces of the Hokages on the stone mountain. Even though he had lots of bad memories from this place, he had to admit, Konoha truly was a beautiful place. Though, he could do without the glares and the whispers. He couldn't really make it all out from here, but he managed to catch a few words that gave him an inkling. They'd thought that he'd disappeared over the months, and they were disappointed that he was back. Lovely. Still, he wouldn't let that deter him. He was glad to be out of the forest, even though he had made good friends with the wildlife in there, but it had one problem. It didn't have ramen. Kakashi had offered to treat him to a few bowls, and he was only too happy to accept. Hey, free ramen. Who could say no to that? Said Jonin was currently walking next to him, nose buried in his book as usual, but that was fine. Naruto was content with taking in the familiar sights. What the? He started when he felt Kakashi grab onto the back of his collar and jump to the side, carrying the blonde with him. Barely a second later, loud shouts from the Anbu could be heard as a body dropped right where the pair had previously been in. Screams of frightened civilians could be heard as most of them ran far away from the street, though a few curious ones stayed nearby to watch the proceedings. Naruto looked at the dead body in shock as Kakashi stood protectively in front of him. Two Anbu dropped down next to the corpse, Boar and Bird. Bird immediately kneeled in front of Kakashi out of reflex. Captain, he called out. I'm not your superior anymore, Bird, don't bow to me, said Kakashi briskly. What's the situation? Bird quickly stood back up as Boar went to inspect the body. We found this Iwa nin snooping around near the eastern perimeter. Ah, Iwa. He knew he recognized that symbol somewhere. This man was from the land of Earth. If he recalled his weekend studies correctly, Iwa was on very bad terms with Konoha after the 3 wars. But still, this man was put down like an animal, no questioning or jury. Was this really right? When he was found out, he immediately attempted to escape, but Boar managed to incapacitate him. Continued Bird. How the hell did he get past the barrier? Questioned Kakashi in surprise. As Bird was busy briefing Kakashi about the event, Naruto slowly approached the downed body of the stone ninja. He had short black hair and a strong jaw with the tanned complexity that came with the harsh sun of the land of Earth. He was wearing the regular Iwa shinobi garbs, red and brown colors to blend in with the environment. His face though, that was what drew his attention the most. It was twisted in pain, forever stuck in this expression of horror thanks to rigor mortis. Something white caught his eye, something poking out of his pocket. Bending down, he reached inside and pulled out a small slip of paper. Only, it wasn't paper, but a photograph. That same man, grinning broadly as a small girl looking to be about 5 or 6 hung off his strong arm like a little monkey. They both looked so happy. This man was a father. What would this girl think when her father wouldn't be coming home? Naruto's face contorted into sadness as his gaze went back to the visage of the stone ninja. Reaching forward, he placed his 2 forefingers on both eyelids and closed them, making the ninja look at least a little bit more peaceful. 3 kunais to the spine had killed him. He remembered once reading that the kunai was originally used as a gardening tool, but ninjas have begun to use them as a weapon over time. You humans are all the same, always turning everything into another way to kill others. The words of the 9 tails were beginning to make a little more sense. A hand placed onto his shoulder made him look back. He saw Kakashi standing behind him sadly, an expression he hadn't seen before in his eyes. Standing up, Naruto reluctantly turned to face him and handed the photograph to his teacher. This guy, he has a daughter. Kakashi took the picture and stared at it forlornly. Looks like it, he replied softly. Bending down, the copy nin placed the picture back into the dead man's pocket and turned back to Bird and Boar. Your superior will be here shortly. Await his instructions. Standing back up and ignoring the replies of, yes sir, he put his hand on Naruto's shoulder again and nudged him in a different direction. Come on, let's get out of here. Naruto nodded sadly and followed after the Jonin, casting one last look at the dead body. What are we doing out here? Naruto looked around the unfamiliar fields of training ground 4. It was a lot lusher than Training Ground 7 and lacking wooden dummies, but their usual training grounds were currently being used by a genin team. "We are doing the second part of this year's training," supplied Kakashi as he landed next to the Jinchuriki. The plan was to go get some Ichirakus, but after the events from earlier, he wanted to do something that would keep the blonde's mind occupied. "Over the last few years, I've taught you the basics. You've picked up a few jutsus here and there, from me or from outside sources. Those past 6 months, you were left in this forest to bring out your survival instincts and your fighting spirits." Naruto turned to face him as he kept going. "The next 5 months will be wrapping up your training with a nice little bow. We'll be refining everything you've learned so far. Every day, you will be fighting me. Over, and over, and over again until I think you are ready." Naruto raised an eyebrow at him. "And what happens after those 5 months?" The copy nin offered him an eye smile. "You either take the genin test, or you go to the academy. It all depends on your progress." He shivered at that. There wasn't anything wrong with the academy, it was a good program. But, it sounded boring, and most of the things taught there wouldn't help him on the battlefield. He needed to become stronger. Besides, he was not really good at social interaction. "So unless I impress you, you're sending me to the academy," he summarized, making Kakashi nod absent-mindedly as he kept reading his book, much to his consternation. "When do we begin?" questioned the blonde. The Sharingan wielder looked up at the sky with a bored expression. "Right now." Kakashi disappeared from the boy's line of sight. Naruto cursed under his breath and dove backwards on instinct, narrowly avoiding the Jonin's jab. "Good," praised the scarecrow. "Take up your stance," he ordered, making Naruto quickly get into his position, right leg bent slightly and left leg standing straight, right hand near his face with his left hand closer to his midsection. "Sloppy," remarked the teacher. "Lock those elbows." Naruto quickly did so as his teacher slowly circled him, watching his stance with a critical eye. "Strike," he commanded. Naruto launched forward and threw a punch at Kakashi, which was easily blocked and countered, making the blonde stumble back. "You're not in a circus," he admonished. "Don't waste energy in big movements, strike fast and strike true." Naruto righted himself and nodded, sweat rolling down his forehead. Naruto engaged him once more, but was easily taken down again by a leg sweep. "Wrong footwork." The blonde shot back to his feet and planted his feet down firmly, taking up his fighting stance once more. "Better. Strike." And he did as instructed, better and stronger this time, but still no match to the might of the Sharingan wielder. He was launched back within seconds but managed to remain on his feet. "Wind style. Air bullets," he called out in his mind. Making the bird hand sign, Naruto took in a deep breath and spat out several highly condensed balls of wind that flew towards the Jonin at great speed. To his surprise though, Kakashi spat out a few balls of fire the same size as his air bullets that completely nullified them and continued in its course, now being larger by the added fuel from the oxygen. Naruto crossed his arms in front of him as the balls of fire impacted into him. Quickly patting his clothes to put them out, he got back into his stance and glared at Kakashi. "Wind is weak to fire, remember that." The two kept on sparring until the sun had set. Chapter 8. First Step. "Where the hell is it?" "Shish." Naruto turned around and smiled apologetically at the people frowning at him in disapproval. "Haha. Sorry," he whispered. The other occupants of the library went back to their literature without another word, making the blonde Jinchuriki sigh quietly in relief and scratch his cheek awkwardly. Note to self, keep emotions in check while in the library. But still, he swore he'd seen that book somewhere when he was doing his pranking research on Metagai all those years ago, this old tome about the Shinigami that was nearly falling apart from age. Okay, I swear it was somewhere in this section. He ground his teeth in frustration when the book was clearly not there anymore and resisted the urge to pull his hair out. Where was that damn book? His search went on for another 15 minutes and he was about ready to throw in the towel. Putting a finger under his chin, Naruto frowned in thought as he tried to figure out his next step of action. Maybe the librarian knows. It was a reach, but better than nothing. With the amount of dust he saw on that book when he'd seen it, no one had seemed to have touched it in years. "Excuse me," he whispered to the librarian behind the counter that was squinting down at a bunch of documents. The woman blinked and lowered her head to peer at him from the bridge of her glasses. "Can I help you, dearie?" He'd always liked this lady, never looking at him with mean eyes or whispering under her breath, treating him like any old lady would treat a child. He didn't know if it was because of her lack of knowledge about him or if she simply didn't care, but that didn't really matter to him. Have you seen this super dusty looking book? Naruto questioned. Brown, made of leather, has a string that wraps around it. The lady's eyes blinked in surprise. That tome on the Shinigami. What on earth do you need that old thing for? Ah. The Uzumaki looked off to the side nervously. School project. The librarian frowned slightly in suspicion before shaking her head in exasperation. Really? Kids these days. Academy students shouldn't have to worry about such topics, Sonny. Only special Jonin levels and above can access it at the back. Well, that was disappointing. Curse this 8-year-old body of his that didn't have any clearance anywhere. But he was a pretty sly guy, maybe he could sneak past her while she wasn't looking. It was a few minutes later when he saw his opportunity. The librarian's pen rolled off the side of her table, making her mutter in annoyance and reach down in search for it. Swiftly moving forward, he quietly opened the door and slipped inside with none being the wiser. The back room seemed pretty similar to the main room, although it looked slightly smaller. The bookcases were different as well, being made of expensive-looking ebony. Better start looking for it before she realized he was here. 5 minutes later. Nope, not here. No, is that mold? Ew. He wiped his hand against his pants as he pushed the books away and looked at the bottom row of the bookcase. Ah, found it, he exclaimed to himself quietly. Carefully picking up the old leather book in fear of having it fall apart in his hands, he placed it onto a table and flipped the tome open. The pages were blotched in yellow from age, and the words were written in some strange cursive variant. Not only that, but more than half of the words seemed to be missing, much to his chagrin. He'd have to decipher it by himself. Shinobi age. .45, Clan of Uzumaki. Those simple words already nearly knocked the wind out of his lungs. Why was his clan mentioned in this? How exactly were they involved with the Shinigami? And what was this book doing here in Konoha? Shinigami. God of death. Spirit. Invites humans. Death. Creature. Archness. He frowned at the macabre words. All of those seemed very unpleasant. Continuing his attempt at deciphering more about the Shinigami, he quickly skimmed through the legible content and flipped to the next page, coming across a very interesting passage. Contract lost. Give, yo, soul. Ritual. Instated. Uzumaki clan. Seals, reach, realm of Libby, afterlife. From what he could garner from this, some sort of ritual was involved, and your soul was the price to pay for it to work. Did that mean he would die? If he did manage to get in contact with the Reaper, maybe there was a way he could persuade him otherwise. The next few pages appeared to be talking about the actual ritual and sealing process. Prayer beads were invoked, and so were curse marks. A line in particular about the Reaper plunging his arm into your soul made him quickly move on to the next subject. Free, Dia. Emin Khans, Ing Seal, Elise. Mask. Stomach. Oot open. Shinigami will. Any soul insid. The souls could be released if you put on a mask and used a technique called Dead Demon Consuming Seal. Or at least, that's what he could understand from it. Unfortunately, he doubted that something so simple was all that he needed to do. Many pages had been ripped out and whatever ones were left were barely distinguishable. He was nearing the end of the book now, which held a few drawings and motifs, the only page in the book that had anything but faded writing. Some brief mentions of an Uzumaki temple with the clan symbol near the outskirts of Konoha kept coming up every now and then. They must have built one when Konoha had made their alliance with his clan's village. Maybe that's how the book got here. It would make sense that important valuables would be transported back to the allied country. He needed to look for it. Not just for the seal, but for his own sake as well. He wanted to learn as much as possible about his clan. Looking across to the drawings, he saw one that depicted a pretty scary-looking mask. If he wasn't wrong, that was a Hanya, a demonic-looking face adorned with horns. Interesting. He assumed that this was the mask needed for the ritual. Below was a small motif showing a red symbol with the label, Uzumaki, scribbled under it in actual handwriting, unlike the rest that seemed to have been typed. It was pretty basic, consisting only of a red spiral. But he'd seen that symbol before. On the back of those Chunin vests and many other clothes made in Konoha. Curiouser and curiouser. So, the death god can be summoned, he summarized in his head. But what I'm looking for is this mask that's apparently in this Uzumaki place that I've never heard of but somehow was there all along, and in that place is a Shinigami mask that I need. It was a stretch, but it's what he was able to garner from the incoherent words in the book. All he had to do was find that temple near the outskirts and find the mask. Simple, right? Yeah, as if it ever was that easy. 5 hours later. This place has probably seen better days, was the thought of the 8-year-old. He'd been looking well over 5 hours for it with the help of his shadow clones. Konoha was a big place, so it had taken him a while. But eventually, a clone had dispelled in this general area and informed him of its location. The entrance looked to have collapsed upon itself, leaving only a tiny gap as the entryway. The roof had several holes in it and the fences on the sides were barely hanging on. If it weren't for the big red spiral above the doorway, he would have thought he was at the wrong place. Crawling under the debris that blocked off most of the entrance, the blonde shook his head to free it of the dust that had stuck to his hair and squinted inside the darkness. It was getting pretty late at night, and dying sun rays were barely providing sufficient lighting. It didn't take him too long for his eyes to adjust, however. There it was. It wasn't difficult to find. This entire temple seemed to have been built solely for these masks, much to his disappointment. The room was tiny, probably the size of a regular-sized bedroom. And on the far wall was a podium where 26 face masks with varying facial expressions were hung into 3 rows of 9, with one gap near the top row. One was missing. Knowing his luck, it was probably the one he was after. The book had shown an illustration of the mask itself, and while they all looked pretty similar, he would be able to recognize it if he saw it. He didn't. Why am I not surprised? He thought contemptuously. Sasuke Uchiha was faced with a conundrum. He saw that blonde kid again, the one he'd met 2 years ago. He was running off to the south for some unknown reason with a determined look in his eyes, and he'd been debating if he should have followed him. He wanted to speak with the boy again. Not only to thank him for accidentally saving Izumi, but also to have a training partner. He'd been doing his own routine by himself when he met him the first time and he wasn't even in the academy, so he assumed that he was a special case. He was probably pretty strong. But while he wanted to approach the boy, the words of Itachi kept playing out in his head. His exiled brother had wanted him to befriend him and, despite everything that Izumi was telling him, he couldn't help but associate Itachi as an evil person. Why would he voluntarily do anything he told him to do? He murdered his clan, his entire family. And as if that wasn't enough, he showed him the deed, over and over and over again until his mind was broken and his spirits were shattered. Mental therapy had become less a need and more of a necessity. Itachi was still very much a sore spot for the dark-haired boy. Ever since the incident, he threw himself harder into his training, each day pushing himself further than the previous one for the sole purpose of being able to one day confront Itachi. He needed to be stronger, to be better. And once he was, he would take him down and get his answers. He didn't know what he would do once he'd beaten him, however. He hated Itachi with a passion and he would like nothing more than to see him begging at his feet, but some tiny part of his mind couldn't help but question his motives, to question the truth. In his 7 years of brotherhood with the prodigy, he'd always seemed to be a pacifist, someone that would prefer to find peaceful answers before resorting to force and violence. He'd always looked out for him as his older sibling. He would comfort him when he was sad and play with him when he was lonely. He'd accompany him to the academy in the morning and walk back with him on the way home. He'd even let him train with him and try out his Anbu equipment sometimes. Then why? Why would he do such a thing? A kind and caring pacifist like him, slaughtering his own blood, his parents that had raised him and cared for him, his cousins that were barely old enough to read, his old aunts and uncles that just wanted to drink their tea peacefully and reminisce about the past. Why was he the only one that had been spared? Sasuke and Kiba, come on down for your sparring match, called out his teacher, Iruka. The boy in the furred hoodie jumped off his chair and whooped in excitement, his companion barking with the same energy. The Uchiha sighed as he got off his chair and made his way down the steps, trying his best to ignore the cheering girls next to him. Whatever the reason was, whatever Izumi thought, Sasuke didn't think he could ever forgive what Itachi had done, even if there was a good reason for it. At the end of the day, his family was still dead, and there was nothing he could do that would bring them back. He would get his answers, even if he had to step over a few corpses along the way. He reached the sparring courtyard and got into his clan's stance, the interceptor fist. Kiba smirked and got down on all fours, Akamaru hopping onto his back. Looking at both fighters, Iruka's raised hand descended into a chopping motion. Begin. Naruto shot forward and threw a quick jab at the masked man, who evaded the attack effortlessly. Quickly ducking under the incoming kick, he hopped back as a chain shot out of the earth and wrapped around the Jonin's ankle. Kakashi was suddenly replaced by a wooden log as the chain slammed it against the ground and reduced it to splinters. The blonde clicked his teeth in impatience as he dug into his pouch and pulled out a smoke bomb, throwing it at the ground and blocking the scarecrow's vision. Kakashi was immediately on his guard. He'd been fighting this kid for 5 months now, he knew how tricky he could be. The sound of an object cutting through the air made him dash to the side, avoiding a kunai with a small parachute attached to it. A distraction. Doing a 180, Kakashi threw a heavy kick at the blonde that had suddenly appeared next to him, catching him by surprise and making him dispel in a cloud of smoke. Another blonde blur appeared behind the taller man as he sliced his tanto at the back of the copycat's neck. Much to his surprise though, the man in front of him began to turn into a shade of blue and was suddenly engulfed in a shower of lightning. Naruto attempted to fight back the sporadic spasms of his muscles from the lightning clone and clenched his fists in frustration. Even after 5 months, no matter how hard he tried, he could still not land a single hit on the Jonin. Taking in a deep breath, he faced the copycat that had landed a few paces in front of him and went through a few hand seals. Tiger, dog, rabbit, snake. Wind style. Great breakthrough. Molding chakra into his lungs and converting it into wind nature, he unleashed a large blast of wind from his mouth straight at the masked man, who only brought a hand up to cover his eyes and applied chakra to his feet to stay in place. Running forward, Naruto went through a few more hand signs. Boar, rabbit, horse, ram. Clenching his right hand into a tight fist at his side, he suddenly shot it forward, a small compressed shockwave of air shooting out of his fist. Wind style. Soaring fist. The ball of air sailed through the air, making the Jonin harden his stance and weather the brunt of the attack. It crashed into the man's stomach and sent him skidding back, though it didn't seem to have much other effect on him. Cursing, Naruto's body flickered forward and jumped high, attempting to throw a right hook at his opponent, who casually leaned back and sent a downwards chop at the boy's back. Grunting, Naruto landed heavily into a crouched position before jumping back up and raising his fist into an uppercut, followed by a high kick and a flurry of punches who were all expertly dodged much to his frustration. Growing tired of the constant evasions, Naruto stopped his barrage and ran around the Jonin, trying to find a weak spot in his guard, though Kakashi wasn't planning to keep him out of his sight as he watched him circle around carefully. Taking out his tanto, he dashed forward and stabbed at the man's right shoulder but was parried by a kunai. Kakashi leaned out of the way of another punch and threw one of his own at the boy's face, sending him crashing into the ground. Scrambling to his feet, Naruto was about to jump back into action only to suddenly stop to avoid running head first into the pointed end of a kunai. "Do you surrender?" asked the Jonin in a lazy tone. Naruto glared at the kunai for a few tense seconds before exhaling and falling back into a sitting position. He brought a hand over to his face, nursing his sore cheek where Kakashi's mean right hook had landed, and cursed under his breath. "Damn it. Now, chided the Jonin as he flipped his book open. "No need to get angry. You're getting better." Naruto grumbled and took a sip from his water bottle. "Not enough apparently. I can't even touch you." "Not sure what you were expecting," started Kakashi lazily as he turned a page. "I used to be Anbu." The blonde sighed and lied down on his back, basking in the feel of the morning dew on the grass to cool his body down. The masked man closed his book and turned to face the blonde. "On your feet." Naruto stood up without a second thought. He recognized that tone from experience and knew better than to question him. Standing straight and at attention, Kakashi crossed his arms and looked at him with a serious expression. "Today marks the last day of our training together," said the scarecrow, making the blonde look at him strangely. "Tomorrow at 1300, you will report to the academy and give this official letter to whoever is in charge inside of room 304. He handed him a slip of paper as his mind began to race. Oh no, what was going on? Was he being sent to the academy? A nervous expression crossed his features, though he knew better than to interrupt the former Anbu while he was in his serious mode. You will attend the Genin exam and follow the instructions given. Study hard tonight, there will be a written exam. Make sure that all your tools are sharpened and organized, prepare adequately. Naruto's mouth hung open in poorly concealed surprise. He'd done it. He had his approval. He didn't have to go through the academy after all. Tomorrow he would be becoming a ninja. A mix of dread and excitement formed into a ball in the pit of his stomach. All those years of training would be over, but a new life was going to take its place, one that was much more dangerous and unforgiving. A hand landed atop his head, startling him out of his thoughts as he looked up at Kakashi, who was now looking at him with an eye smile. You're going to do fine, he stated confidently as he removed his hand. Also, you should consider getting some shinobi clothing. Those civilian ones you have on offer no protection or storage space. He lifted up an end of his blue scarf and frowned slightly. You should also keep that at home. It'll only get in the way. He didn't want to leave his precious scarf behind, but he knew that Kakashi was right. Enemies could easily grab onto it or he could trip on it if he wasn't careful. Plus, there was the chance that it would get ruined and he absolutely did not want that. With a nod, Naruto straightened up and saluted the older man playfully. Yes sir. Was he ready for this? He closed the door behind him with a soft click and adjusted his gray jumper. At his teacher's behest, he'd decided to change his outfit to something a bit more practical. He now wore a gray top with short sleeves, a red spiral on the back and a gray hood coming with it to cover his blindingly blonde locks in the case of emergency sneakiness. Underneath his gray jumper was a skin-tight shinobi mesh shirt for added protection that tucked inside simple black shinobi pants with a tool pouch behind the right hip and a kunai pouch on the right thigh. Standard black shinobi sandals finished his new look as he stuffed his bare hands inside the pockets of his jumper. He wasn't wearing any gloves. They weren't all that comfortable. The life ahead of him was one that he knew for a fact to probably be the most gruesome life a human could have. After his research on the Grim Reaper a few months ago, he'd become interested in what other secrets were tucked away inside that library. And the results were surprising. It contained pretty much everything, ranging from the history of the shinobi world, to the foundations of the great villages, to the great wars, the bijus, the three sanins, the cages. All of that was immensely interesting to the boy, having always liked reading when he was much younger. However, the most interesting parts were biographies, manuscripts, quotes from the old ages and from veterans. They described the story of their lives, what drove them, what they fought for, what they believed in. And while they were all varying stories, one thing seemed to be present in all of them. War was hell. It took everything from you until there was nothing left. And after that, it took even more. In the end, there were no winners. Only men and women with broken spirits that had lost more than anybody should. To be shinobi meant living a cursed life. It was something that required your blood, sweat and tears and an immense amount of sacrifice. Human greed was ever present, be it for money or power, which drove men and women to unfathomable actions and turned their comrades against the other, creating only more strife. If he was going down that path, then he needed to devote his whole being to it. Alas, he couldn't do all of this alone. As much as he wanted to tell himself that he'd just not make any bonds to make it easier, he knew he couldn't spend his entire life in solitude, only looking out after himself. He'd done that for 6 years of his life, and he didn't think he could do any more. He could not cope with the loneliness for much longer. He could die at any moment. And whatever friends and allies he made could die at any moment as well. His eyes steeled as he neared the academy and he took a deep breath to calm his frayed nerves. Whatever the future had in store, he had no choice but to take it head on. The basic rules of a shinobi as well as some of the history lessons that we've been going over. The second section will be focused primarily on mathematics. A unanimous groan seemed to echo within the classroom at that, making the academy teacher Suzume frown sternly and readjust her glasses. No complaining now, you've had plenty of time to study sufficiently for this. A knock drew the attention of the germaphobe as she turned her head towards the door. Come in, she called out. After a few seconds, the door slowly opened to reveal a small gray-wearing blonde boy, younger than any other kid in her classroom. The kid looked around for a few seconds before turning back to her. Can I help you with something, young man? She asked as she approached him. God, he already hated this place. The way all those bratty-looking kids were staring at him, some snickering and whispering to their friends, some looking at him like he was a lost puppy. His introverted anxiety began to rear its ugly head as he resisted the urge to stare down at his feet and hide inside of his jacket. He walked forward to meet her halfway and wordlessly handed her the folded-up piece of paper that Kakashi had given him. She took it and skimmed it over quickly as the other students watched on in curiosity. Suzume turned to the students in the classroom and began speaking. All right everyone, we have a new student that will be taking the exam with us. Please treat him well. She turned back to Naruto and gave him a kind smile. You can go and sit next to Yuna. Yuna, please raise your hand. Naruto looked around the room as nobody moved, becoming more and more distressed as time went on. An irritated tick mark appeared on Suzume's forehead as she closed her eyes in exasperation and crossed her arms. Yuna, she barked out sharply, making a dozing brunette shoot up in her seat in surprise. Huh, wah, as I was saying, repeated Suzume in a warning tone. This new student will be taking the test with us. Please raise your hand so he knows where to sit. The half-asleep academy student slowly raised her hand and Naruto nervously made his way up the stairs. Moving further against to the side to let the blonde sit down, Yuna rested her chin on the palm of her hand as she curiously watched the younger boy from the corner of her eye. Now where was I? Ah, right. The second section of the written test will be mathematics. We will then move along into a sparring match against our instructor Mizuki who will be arriving shortly. You must last at least 2 minutes against him without being pushed out of the ring to be eligible to pass. Next will be pissed. Called out Yuna discreetly to the whiskered boy next to her, who was listening intently to the instructions. Naruto blinked in surprise and turned towards the brunette that was trying to get his attention. Huh. Yuna raised an eyebrow. So, what are you like, 7? Naruto furrowed his brow as he turned back towards the teacher and tried his best to listen to what she was saying. No, I'm 8, he said in a small tone. His desk mate looked unimpressed. Wow, big difference. She waited for a reply, but when she was met with none she continued. Aren't you a bit young to be taking the exam? What were your parents thinking sending you here now? His face remained unchanged and unmoving, but his fists balled slightly against his lap. The girl frowned at his lack of response and looked back at her teacher, listening to her talk more about the test. At least 10 points in total for Shuriken Jutsu. The fourth and final part will be ninjutsu, which will consist of 3 academy techniques that you have been taught during the years. Yuna looked at him once more. What's your name anyway? Naruto met her eyes as a look of slight dubiety crossed his features. Man, were all girls this age so talkative? He was having trouble hearing what the teacher was saying. I'm Naruto, he said finally. Yuna pursed her lips and covered her mouth as her eyes crinkled in amusement. PFF'd, you're named after a ramen topping, she said trying to hold back her laughter. Naruto looked affronted and was about to riposte when Suzume beat him to the punch. You too. Pay attention. Yuna rolled her eyes and stared ahead as the blonde next to her straightened up and lowered his head in embarrassment. More minutes ticked by as the bored students listened to the academy instructor finish up her explanation. I'm Yuna, she finally said after a long pause. Not that she needed to, he'd already heard it when the teacher had called out to her. Despite that, Naruto nodded but stayed silent. Shortly after, Suzume has handed out the written exam to every student in the room. And frankly, he was not impressed. These were very basic questions. What was the first Hokage's Kekkei Genkei called? What was the name of the third's personal summon? While he supposed it was good knowledge, it definitely was not something that was needed to see if you had what it took to be a shinobi. This information would not be useful out in the field. The mathematics portion was a bit more applicable, but still pretty simple in his opinion. The second part was Shuriken Jutsu and, while he wasn't the best at it, he still surprised everyone by managing to score a 9/10 in both the shuriken and kunai throwing, only being slightly off mark on one target. Which brings us to the third part of the exam. He was watching a civilian based off his attire and his sloppy technique trying his best to stay within the ring as the teacher Mizuki hit him with various slow and light attacks. Time. Called out Suzume. Mizuki stopped and smiled at the panting student who wiped his forehead in relief. Phew. You're way strong Mizuki-sensei. Next is, Suzume began as she peered at the roll call. Uzumaki Naruto. Many heads turned towards the youngest in the room as some of the students began to whisper to each other. They had all been surprised by his score during the second section and were curious to see how he would fare in taijutsu. Naruto took a deep breath as he focused his mind on the teacher and forced himself to ignore the rest of the class. His introverted nature will need to be curbed for now, he couldn't afford to lose his focus. Stepping onto the ring, Mizuki smiled politely and nodded at the blonde. "Good luck, Naruto-kun," he said amicably. Naruto nodded in thanks and got into his ready stance. Suzume looked between both fighters and raised her hand. "Begin." Mizuki ran towards the blonde and brought his arm back in preparation for a punch. The Uzumaki watched him approach with confusion clearly written across his face. The silver-haired Chunin threw a punch which Naruto easily deflected with the back of his hand and countered with a palm strike to the chest to push him back. Man, that guy was weak. So much weaker than Kakashi, who he could barely follow with his eyes and who hit like an elephant. He was running at the pace of a snail to him, and his strike from earlier felt like it could have barely disturbed a fly. Not to mention how much he had telegraphed that punch. He almost felt insulted. Mizuki grunted and skidded backwards, rubbing the spot on his chest as he looked at the student in surprise. That was new. Before he could ponder on that any further, the blonde terror was already upon him, jumping high and delivering a strong kick. Mizuki brought up his arm to block it and found himself surprised once again as his arm became slightly numb from the force behind it. Using the Chunin's arm as a springboard, Naruto shot up and nailed the underside of his chin with his foot, making his head lurch back. Quickly righting himself, Mizuki sent a right hook at the blonde which was caught into an open palm. Going down for a leg sweep, he tried to knock the smaller boy off his feet, but Naruto already had his legs planted down firmly. The foot connected against his ankle and only made it budge a little, making the 8-year-old wince. Mizuki frowned and attempted grabbing his arm to put him into a headlock and throw him out of bounds, only for the blonde to slip under him and roll a few paces back near the edge of the ring. The Chunin instructor spun around and charged at the blonde once more. Good, he was beginning to get angry and was thinking less about the match and more about landing a hit on him. As the shinobi approached him, Naruto quickly dashed to the side, narrowly avoiding his angry swing. The taller man gasped and suddenly stopped in his tracks as he noticed he was already on the edge of the ring and flailed his arms around in an attempt to stop himself from falling forward. Unfortunately for the silver-haired, the prankster king was already behind him and delivered a kick to his behind, sending him flying out of the ring. The whole class was silent as Suzume stared in astonishment. An 8-year-old had managed to knock a full-grown Chunin out of the ring, that was unheard of. The goal was to not get pushed out of the ring by Mizuki, not actually beat him. Mizuki stood up in embarrassment and rubbed the back of his head. Haha, you got me good, Naruto-kun. That was a good ruse, great job. His pride was hurt, but even he had to praise the skills that the young boy had displayed. Naruto shuffled awkwardly and bowed in respect. Thank you, Mizuki-san. The blonde stepped out of the ring and made his way back towards the crowd of students who were all staring at him in a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Whoa kid, that was impressive, said Yuna as she approached him. Naruto lowered his head in embarrassment as she elbowed him playfully. Are you some kind of prodigy or something? Hey, of course not, replied the boy in a weak tone. Compliments still caught him off guard. Okay, Naruto, said Uzume as she looked at the boy from behind her desk. This is the fourth and final test, ninjutsu. You've done well so far, now this is the home stretch. First, start off by showing me the substitution jutsu. Naruto nodded and brought up his right hand, shaping it into a half-ram seal. With barely a whisper, Naruto was replaced by the chair that was tucked away under another table. Another switch and Naruto was back in his previous spot. Excellent. Splendid chakra control. Minimal smoke and fluid transition. She nodded her head and scribbled some stuff on her paper. Next is transformation. Another seal and Naruto transformed into an exact replica of a Yame Ichiraku. The teacher inspected the change with a critical eye and nodded in approval. Very good. Now the clone jutsu. Naruto remained still for a few moments as he pondered the request, making Suzume raise an eyebrow at the blonde's sudden hesitation. Is something wrong? Any clone jutsu. Oh, right, confirmed the teacher. Academy students usually only knew the basic Bunshin no jutsu, so they just never bothered to specify. Without the use of any hand seals, two clones of Naruto suddenly materialized into existence next to him. Suzume looked impressed. Very good, Naruto-kun. Using the Bunshin no Jutsu without any hand seals and with no visible smoke is incredibly impressive, especially at your age. Ah, actually, interrupted the blonde. It's not the Bunshin, but the Kage Bunshin. To prove his point, he turned towards one of the clones and poked it on the cheek. Hey, quit that, snapped the clone as he smacked the original's finger away. Naruto winced and nursed his sore finger. What was that for, idiot? What are you calling me an idiot for? I'm you, stupid. Suzume's gaped at the scene before her, glasses slipping down her nose from her slack-jawed expression. The Jinchuriki stepped out of the academy, adjusting the blue forehead protector that was now tied around its namesake. The sky had already began to darken. The roll call to take the ninjutsu exam had been done in alphabetical order, so he'd been among the last ones to exit the building. Dad, look, I finally graduated, proclaimed a loud voice. Naruto turned towards the sound and saw a kid from the classroom he was previously in, proudly showing off his shiny new headband to his father. The dad smiled at the boy and ruffled his head affectionately. Great job, son. Your mother and I are proud of you. We're having your favorite tonight as celebration. The boy cheered as both walked off, the father with an arm over the son's shoulder. Naruto watched both retreat with a small smile over his face. Interactions like these always filled him with conflicting emotions. Yo, fishcake. The blonde turned towards a familiar tomboyish voice and watched Yuna approach him with her hands casually in her pockets. So, you made it as well, huh? Looks like it, confirmed the boy as he smiled up at the taller girl. You did too. Congratulations. Oh, yeah, she walked past him as she approached a woman that was looking towards her direction. See you during the team placements. Naruto watched her talk to the beaming woman who had her hands clapped together, making Yuna look down in fake disinterest as red lightly dusted her cheeks in embarrassment. Frowning down at the ground, Naruto stuffed his hands in his pockets and began his way home. He'd only made it a few meters before a fist bopped him lightly on his head. Flinching and reeling back in surprise, Naruto looked up and came face to face with the smiling visage of his teacher. Kakashi, he said in surprise. Kakashi's eye smile seemed to increase in size. Hey kiddo, nice work on your graduation, proclaimed the Jonin jovially. I never had a doubt in my mind. Naruto flushed at the praise and rocked back and forth on his feet. Really? Course. The scarecrow retorted with such certainty that it made the boy's heart swell. Reaching down, Kakashi lowered the blonde's headband with the palm of his hand to make it cover his eyes and chuckled at his squawk of indignation. Now come on, everyone's waiting for you. Wait, what? Naruto pushed the headband back onto his forehead and noticed that the masked man had already began to walk away. Running ahead to catch up to him, Naruto looked up at the man in confusion. What do you mean by everyone? Go on Naruto, drink up, encouraged Kakashi as he himself downed a cup of sake. Naruto looked at his own cup in uncertainty with nervous sweat rolling down his forehead. I don't know about this, sensei. Are you sure this is all right? Kakashi had quickly taken him to a shinobi-only bar called Shushuya, where many Chunins and Jonins had gathered. The rowdy place was full of energy and brimming with excitement as a jolly atmosphere filled the area. Bah, you worry too much. Really Kakashi, you're a terrible role model, sighed Kurenai in an aggravated tone. It's fine Kurenai, Uzumakis can't get drunk. That's not what the issue is here. Among those shinobi were many of Kakashi's close friends. He recognized Guy, the man he'd pranked for his initiation test. He recognized the lady with the long purple hair. She was one of those people assigned with guarding his home and making sure he was safe. Two others were those guys he'd sometimes see guarding the gates of Konoha. The other unfamiliar faces didn't ring any bells to him, but he made sure to burn them into his mind. All had welcomed him with open arms and had gathered to congratulate him on his graduation. His heart fluttered once more in gratitude as he tried his best to keep the moisture in his eyes as unnoticeable as possible. There was one man smoking a cigarette and with a scruffy beard. A lady with red eyes and a dress that looked like it was made of bandages. Another girl with pineapple-shaped purple hair wearing barely any clothes beneath her trench coat. A man with a bandana chewing on a senbon, A man with bags under his eyes and a pale complexion, a guy with scars all over the left side of his face and spiky brown hair. That sure was a lot of people that were going out of their way to celebrate for him. Naruto-san. Turning around, Naruto was met with Gaimeta, who was grinning down at him with a 1000 megawatts smile. The taijutsu specialist crossed his arms and looked down at the blonde. Even though my pride is still hurt from falling victim to your most unyouthful prank all those years ago, I still wish to congratulate you for a job well done. I look forward to working with you as fellow shinobis of the Leaf. Guy nodded in approval at his own words as Naruto smiled up at him in appreciation. With that being said, I wish to give you this gift so you may continue to fan your flames of youth in your endeavors. Hey, we said we'd wait till later for the gifts, Guy, said Yugao irritably. Guy laughed boisterously and plopped down his suspiciously heavy present onto the table that made the cups and bottles rattle dangerously. Ha ha ha. Forgive me, my friend, but when I see such youthful young minds, it just brings a tear to my eye and I simply could not wait any longer. Thank you, Guy-san, said an overwhelmed Naruto as he unwrapped the gift with barely restrained anticipation. Ripping up the package, Naruto looked upon 4 training weights to go around his wrists and ankles. Guy grinned once more and gave him a thumbs up. This will help you during your red-hot blooded training, my friend. Naruto nodded in amazement and attempted to lift them up but found that they were a lot heavier than they looked. Kakashi sighed and picked them up with an ease that made Naruto gawk at him amazement. I'll hold on to those for now, Naruto, said Kakashi as he sealed them away in his pouch. Naruto nodded and snickered to himself as Guy went into another tangent at Kakashi, who was doing his best to ignore him. It's my turn now, said Yugao as she smiled. Kakashi told me about your interest in kenjutsu training, so I got you a better tanto. One that was forged in Kiri and is also chakra conductive. She moved some cups out of the way to make room on the table and placed a long item wrapped in cloth in front of the stunned Jinchuriki. Wow, that sounded like a really expensive gift. Unwrapping it, Naruto was met with the sight of a tanto that, funnily enough, did not look all that different than the one he had, except it was a slightly darker color and had a red spiral on the hilt that contrasted nicely on the near black background. Picking it up, Naruto noticed that it felt much lighter than his previous tanto and the blade itself was incredibly sharp enough to look like it would draw blood just by being near it. Thank you so much, Yugao-san, said Naruto in gratitude as he replaced the old tanto on his back for his new one. Rolling his shoulders a bit to test the feel, Naruto smiled at how light his back felt compared to before. Yeah, you're probably gonna need to learn how to actually use conductive metal first, said Asuma as he fished around for something inside his pouch. You're a wind user, right? Well, you're in luck. I'm one of the only wind users in the village. I wrote down instructions on how to channel wind chakra inside your blade. Naruto took the offered scroll and stared at it in disbelief. How the hell did you guys even have time to get these? I graduated barely 10 minutes ago. Kakashi smiled in his direction and waved his hand in dismissal. Hey, we knew you'd do great. But what if I failed? The Jonin was silent for a few moments before slowly taking another sip of his sake. Conversation soon began anew across the bar once more as Naruto watched on with a twitching eyebrow at the lack of answer. Kurenai stepped forward. Naruto, said the Genjutsu mistress, drawing the blonde's attention to her. I know you like taking care of plants, so I got you this. She held up a small pouch which the Jinchuriki accepted with curiosity. These are seeds for zinnia flowers. With enough care, they'll bloom into beautiful orange petals. Naruto didn't know how she knew that he liked taking care of plants, but he didn't care. He was so thankful for these gifts he could barely find the words to express his gratitude. Kurenai gave him a knowing smile and moved back so that Kakashi could offer his last gift. The masked man in question finished his saucer and gave a contented sigh. Alright, guess it's my turn. He reached inside of his vest and fished out an orange cloth-like material. Taking it in his hands, Naruto unfolded it to see that it was faded orange face mask, much like the one that Kakashi wore all the time. Kakashi-sensei, this is. You don't have to wear it all the time or anything, said Kakashi awkwardly. Kakashi was many things, but good at gift giving was not one of them. But it's handy to have for undercover missions. Those whisker marks will surely give you away all the time. Naruto stared at the orange face mask in stunned silence as tears began to fall from his eyes. Smiling sheepishly, Kakashi reached down to ruffle his head and filled up his saucer once more. Naruto quickly wiped his eyes in embarrassment as he struggled to meet his eyes. The path ahead isn't going to be easy, began Kakashi. But bonds are what helps you remain sane and keep pushing forward. And while we're here, you'll always have us to fall back on. Naruto shut his eyes tightly and nodded as more tears began to flow down his cheeks, making Kakashi smile warmly at him and pat him on the back. Now, drink up. Naruto smiled and stared at his cup of sake. Even though he didn't know what would happen in the future, even though it was going to be full of hardships, he knew that he was going to be fine. He brought the saucer to his lips and downed it in one go. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.